Okay, John, the next thing I'd like to talk about here is going to be stalls, and we're going to just combine the power on and power off stalls. But what I'd like to talk about first is what is a stall, and then how are they going to be performed in the 172?
Okay. Well, in order for an aircraft wing to produce lift, JC, the air has to flow smoothly over the surface of the wing. And as you slow the airplane down, you increase the angle of attack. The wing's pointed more and more into the air compared to the direction it's moving. And finally, if the angle of attack gets so great, the air can no longer flow smoothly over the surface of the wing. And then when that happens, lift is destroyed and the aircraft is said to be stalled. To recover from the stall, all you have to do is just simply gently lower the nose to reduce that angle of attack to let the air flow smoothly over the wing again. So that is what a stall is. Now the question is, how do you perform a stall? Very carefully, JC, is the answer to that question. Well, the first thing on any stalling maneuver to think about is you want to make sure that you do a clearing turn, that you clear the area because you may be descending down through altitude, so you want to do maybe a 90 and another 90 or 180, some kind of clearing turn so that you can look all around you and look down to make sure you're clear. And you do this before any maneuver, but it's especially important on stalls. Let's talk about, for instance, we'll do a departure stall. The idea is, the whole idea of training in stalls and performing stalls as a pilot is that you want to recognize situations where stalls might occur, and you also want to be able to recognize when a stall does occur and how to recover with a minimum altitude loss. So the whole training situation is set up to give you various scenarios where you might anticipate a stall could happen accidentally. One of them is departing from the airport. You get distracted somehow, so let's assume you're climbing out with full power. Your flaps are in the takeoff position, which is normally up, and you might be in a little turn to the left, and you get distracted, you keep pulling back on the wheel, and that would be a stall. Of course, you don't want to do this at takeoff altitude of departing an airport, so you go up to altitude and do exactly the same thing. You have full power, nose up, and you hold the nose up, act as if you're a little distracted, and finally you keep pulling back on the wheel and stall the aircraft. And since you're already at full power, all you have to do to recover from this stall is add the nose, or lower the nose just a little bit, probably down to the horizon, and then when you get recovered from the stall, pitch up just a little bit. You don't want to have a secondary stall. You don't want to stall it again, but pitch up just enough to minimize the altitude loss. That's the whole objective of that. I might add, though, that power-on stalls occur with lots of air going over the inner portions of the wing and very little air over the outer portion, so they're a little harder to maintain control of the aircraft in. Because the ailerons tend to stall a little more quickly than they would normally. The inner portion of the wing stalls. We've got a lot of power there, it's not going to. So they're a little harder to control. Power is destabilizing anyway. So power on stalls require a little more attention to control the aircraft. One other thing I should mention is it's very important when you're doing a power on stall in particular to have right rudder in there, correct for that torque, because you don't want to stall the airplane in an uncoordinated fashion. Now, the other kind of stall that we can talk about is an approach to landing stall, and again, it's setting up a scenario where you're in landing configuration, you're approaching, you may be in a little turn to the left as in left bank, and once again, you're simulating this at higher altitude, and you just simply pull back on the wheel and hold the nose right about on the horizon. Don't let the airplane descend. You're distracted. You're looking for traffic. You're pulling back at the same time. Get the airplane to stalling speed. Let the aircraft stall. And in this case, you don't have power on, so you would want to apply power, pitch down as necessary to minimize the altitude loss, and pitch back up, maybe even retract the flaps to an approach flap configuration.
Okay. You mentioned we wanted to be very careful about making sure the airplane was coordinated. What can happen if we're uncoordinated when the airplane stalls?
Well, I anticipated that question, JC. In fact, if you might notice, folks, I let myself into a situation where he might ask that. I kind of alluded to it. If you do that, you better be ready to answer the question. So here's the question. Well, let's assume you're on this departure stall. And again, we're simulating this at altitude. We've cleared the area. What would happen if the airplane is not coordinated and you've got the ball out of there in an uncoordinated fashion out of the cage off to one side? You might find that one wing stalls before or more fully than another wing. And the wing that is more fully stalled will go down. And when it goes down, the angle of attack increases and it stalls more fully. And the wing that's less fully stalled goes up and the angle of attack decreases and it begins to generate more lift. And this causes a rotation. In fact, they call that an auto-rotation because it does it on its own and it sustains itself on its own. And it'll just keep in that rotation until you bring it out. And of course, the nose will go down. The airplane will rotate, tends to rotate around the longitudinal axis pointed right down at the ground. And it's a stabilized configuration as far as the airplane's concerned. One wing stays stalled, the other wing continues to generate lift, and it'll rotate around.
And what is the proper spin recovery procedure in the 172?
Well, JC, if you have power on, the first thing to do is close the throttle. And then the aircraft, of course, is rotating. You use opposite rudder to the direction of the rotation, full opposite rudder, and neutralize the ailerons and briskly push forward on the wheel to break that stall. And as the airplane stops rotating, you come off and neutralize the rudder pedals and then ease back very gently on the wheel, because now you're diving and picking up some speed.
Okay. You've just described a spin very well. And how would you recognize a spin as opposed to a steep spiral?
Well, if you're in a steep spiral, what's going to happen is the airspeed will keep increasing. If you're just simply spiraling down, you're not in this auto-rotative stalled condition. And in order for the spin to occur and an aircraft to stay in the spin, it's really got to be stalled. At least one wing has to be fully stalled. And that occurs at slower speeds. So if your speed builds, you're in a spiral. If your speed stays the same, you're in a spin.
Okay, good. Good answer. The next thing we want to talk about is maneuvering the aircraft during slow flight. And what we're interested in, again, here is, number one, what is slow flight, and why is it going to be important to us to know how to do this? And then the last thing is how do we perform it in the 172?
Okay, I guess that's a three-part question, folks. Okay, what is slow flight, I think, was the first part of the question. And I don't know whether I'm being tested on remembering all the questions at once, but I may come back to you on this. But the first question was, what is slow flight? And slow flight, to me, is flight just above stalling speed. I think in the practical test standards, they define it as 1.2 times stalling speed in clean configuration is the way they define it. But somewhat just above stalling speed. The whole idea of slow flight is the airplane behaves differently when you're in slow flight, not versus cruise flight. It's a little harder to control, requires a little more attention, and the real reason you really want to practice slow flight is you're going to be in slow flight just before the moment of touchdown on the runway. So here you are, right near the ground in slow flight, and perhaps the most dangerous situation being near the ground. The airplane is a little harder to control, so the FAA thinks it would be wise for you to know how to control the aircraft in slow flight. And also, it's an approach to the stall, and the airplane sounds different and behaves differently in slow flight. And so they want you to recognize the different speeds of the aircraft by control feel, noise, wind noise, the sloppiness of the controls, and so on. So you want to become familiar with all these regimes. So that's what slow flight is. That's why you do slow flight. The way you would do slow flight is simply reduce the power to a power setting that will have the airplane gradually slow down. And as you get slower and slower, you get to the point where you're on what's called the backside of the power required curve, where it takes more and more power to fly slower and slower. So as you slow the airplane down, eventually you're going to have to come back in with power and add power and fly the airplane in slow flight. You're going to see that it requires much more rudder. Again, right rudder, because you're adding power and you're very slow, and that's critically important, and that's one of the things you want to think about. And if you did a go-around right above an airport, you're in slow flight with lots of power, so it's a scenario you want to be familiar with. And, of course, it's more difficult to hold. The controls are less effective, more difficult to control hold heading, hold altitude, and so the scenario is to do a few turns, hold altitude, maybe some climbs in a sense, just get a feel for the controls of the aircraft.
Well, yeah.
Did I get all the questions, JC?
Yeah, I think you got all of them. The only thing I would add is that we can do them flaps up and flaps down and all of that, and the speed should remain the same throughout the whole maneuver.
And I might add, for everybody's benefit, I think it's a little bit of a difficult exercise, too.
It's not trivial. Yeah, none of these exercises, as a training maneuver, none of them are trivial. Yeah. They're easy to perform sloppily, and they're very difficult to perform well. Okay, let's see. And the next thing we'd like to talk about is a steep turn. And the same sort of thing apply here is, number one, what is a steep turn? And why are we interested in performing them? And then how are we going to perform the maneuver in our airplane today?
Okay. Once again, a steep turn, I think, is, and I'm not sure of this actually, JC, anything more than about 30 degrees of bank is considered a steep turn. They're performed at 45 degrees of bank on the flight test, and I don't know, I think the real definition now that's coming back to me, like Yogi Berra says, deja vu all over again. But anyway, I believe a steep turn is any turn sufficiently steep that you have an overbanking tendency. Isn't that the official FAA definition? And I just did something, I don't know whether, would an examiner answer me yes if I got the question right in that case?
Probably. Yeah. I would say yeah. Since we're just talking a little bit, I would say yeah, they probably would.
Yeah, okay. So any turn that results in an overbanking tendency is considered a steep turn. They're practiced at 45 degrees bank. And once again, there's more load factor on the aircraft. It requires more power to fly. Requires more rudder correction to coordinate the turn. Steep turns are difficult, and that's why they have you practice steep turns. You get used to a new airplane. One of the things that people do is use steep turns as a way of getting the feel of the aircraft. So steep turns are a little bit more difficult, therefore they ask you to do steep turns. The way you do it, I'm not sure I've answered the question, but by the way, you have to add back pressure, a lot of back pressure, as you pass. Normally about through 30 degrees of bank, it becomes significant to add back pressure in a steep turn, and it will require just a little bit of increase in power. So the way I would perform a steep turn is, once again, I'd look all around for traffic. I'd clear the area because I'm going to be turning, and my attention's likely to be focused a little bit more on what I'm doing, so I want to make sure I clear the area before I do the turn. And simply gradually roll the airplane into a bank, add back pressure as necessary to maintain altitude. And as I pass through 30 degrees, it's going to take considerable bit more back pressure. Add in just a little bit more power, roll the airplane to 45 degrees of bank, and watch outside, get a visual picture of what it's going to look like. If you're in a side-by-side airplane, steep turns are going to look differently turning, say, to the left than they are to the right because you're sitting differently in the airplane. So you need to get familiar with the visual picture, and that's part of what the training for the exercise is. When you're coming up on your heading, anticipate that the heading, depending on your rate of turn, roll out smoothly, release the back pressure, and ease off on the power back to where you were to begin with. You want to maintain, of course, altitude, and you want to be able to roll out on the headings appropriately.
Okay, in order for us to maintain the speed within the limits as prescribed in the PTS, what are we going to have to do as we roll into the turn and increase the back pressure? The airplane.
I think we discussed that. We're going to have to add power.
Okay, we are going to have to add power. I just wanted to clarify the point.
Okay.
That's all. And let's see, one more thing here. How are we going to do ground reference maneuvers? We have 3 in this airplane, which each one is very similar to the others, and I think we could probably cover all of them here at one time. And so why don't we just pick like S-turns, and how are we going to accomplish S-turns? What are they? And the second thing is, why are they interesting to us?
Okay.
And then the third thing is, how are we going to perform them in the airplane?
Well, I don't know that S-turns are all that interesting, JC, but let's talk about what they are. The purpose of all of these ground reference maneuvers is to have the applicant to be able to control the airplane while looking outside the window of the aircraft, and they make good sense because it's not at all uncommon for someone to go out and get the private pilot ticket and go out and circle over somebody's house at low altitude. By low altitude, I mean less than 1,000 feet or something of that sort. And so it's very important that you be able to do this and control the aircraft safely because it's a recognition that human nature is such that people will do some ground reference maneuvers after they get their pilot's license. The first thing to do is pick an area that you're not going to be annoying the neighbors or representing a hazard to persons or property on the surface. So you pick an appropriate area to do the ground reference maneuver. Pick an appropriate altitude, somewhere between 600 and 1,000 feet above ground level. And then one of the assignments, you're going to hold that altitude. That's part of the whole program. In the case of an S-turn, what you're really trying to do is you pick some landmark, like a road, and do semicircles around the road. You do a semicircle to the left, which is just a 180-degree turn, but you want to keep these semicircles symmetrical. You want them the same shape on each side of the road, and then do a turn to the right, and have it be the same radius and the same shape. And as you cross the road, you want to have wings, well, actually, you want your path of flight perpendicular to the road. You may have to crab a little bit for the wind, but you want to have wings level and your path of flight perpendicular to that road as you cross it. You want to enter these maneuvers downwind, and the reason you enter ground reference maneuvers downwind is that when you're downwind, your ground speed is the highest, and your rate of turn required will be faster, because the faster your ground speed, which is you're traveling over time over the ground, the faster your rate of turn is, which is the amount of degrees of turn over time. So when you're downwind, your ground speed is faster, your rate of turn is faster, and your bank, therefore, will have to be steepest. So when you enter the maneuver downwind, establish that bank, that's the maximum bank you're going to have to do anywhere throughout the entire maneuver. So it's always wise to enter ground reference maneuvers downwind to establish your steepest bank angle. On an S-turn, you would cross the road or whatever boundary you've selected at 90 degrees, roll into that angle of bank that establishes the radius that you want, and fly a constant radius. And you're going to have to constantly adjust that, or continuously adjust your turn to correct for the wind, so that you maintain a constant radius around a nice semicircle around there, and then you'll do the same thing going the other direction. Your banks will be shallower upwind, steeper downwind. You're going to have to crab when you're 90 degrees of the wind. So you've got all of this going on at once while you're maintaining altitude and maintaining reference to the ground.
Yeah, I feel that the S-turn probably combines the elements of the other two maneuvers for the most part, and this is why I talk about it probably more than I do rectangular patterns of turns around a point. But a rectangular pattern has a direct correlation to something else that we need to do when we're flying the airplane. And
it certainly does. It correlates to flying a pattern to land the airplane.
Certainly, airport traffic patterns. And just to provide a little feedback to you here, that many times on check rides, if there's a wind blowing and we go out and we'll do a rectangular pattern, and the applicant really knows how to do a great rectangular pattern, but as soon as we get to the airport, he pays no attention to what
It's a little bit more going around the airport.
That's
so
true.
what you're suggesting, JC, I think it's suggesting is make sure you fly a proper rectangular pattern when you're flying around the airport.
Sure.
Crab as necessary to correct for the
Sure,
wind.
wind corrections apply in airport traffic patterns just like they do in ground reference maneuvers.
It's amazing what examiners can see, isn't it?
All right, John, the next thing we're going to talk about for a little bit here is some attitude instrument flying that's important for pilots at all experience levels to have. And so first of all, I'd like to know, what are the primary attitude instrument flying skills that you need to know?
For instrument flight?
For instrument flight.
What are the primary skills?
Yes.
Well, you have to be able to scan the panel and develop some procedure that you have of looking at the instruments in an appropriate order so that you're not fixing on one instrument. Then, of course, the interesting thing about it is there are a lot of instruments in the airplane. It's kind of like a symphony. You have to interpret the thing. What are all these things telling me? And one instrument alone won't tell you the whole story, so you have to kind of interpret the whole picture. And it would be nice if you could maybe control the aircraft at the same time. So you want to be able to respond to what you see as a situation and take appropriate measures to control the aircraft.
Okay. And when we're talking about the instrument scan, what are some of the errors, or what are the errors that we need to avoid? You mentioned one, but let's talk about that.
Well, I think the one that is most obvious is that you're scanning, you're looking at the panel, and people tend to look at one instrument, particularly the one that's going awry. Of course, my problem, that's very difficult because many times all of them are going awry. But you want to not fixate on one instrument, because if you pay all your attention on one instrument, then everything else goes to pot on you while you're doing a great job of that one instrument. You might be holding your heading, but you're upside down, you know. So you fixate on an instrument. Another one is you fail to look at an instrument. You're leaving some important piece of information out. So you want to make sure that your scan includes the important stuff. And I can't really think of any other scanning error. You might misinterpret the instrument, but that's interpretation. So there is some other item you were looking for, JC.
Yeah. The third one is emphasis, which is very much like fixation, but to not quite as much of a degree.
Yeah, it's spending too much time on one instrument.
That's right. Okay, and then what about interpretation? What are some of the errors that you can get into in interpreting the instruments?
Misinterpreting them, it seems to me, would be a big error.
Why would you be misinterpreting what an instrument's telling you?
Well, one, the instrument could be lying to you, because sometimes you have instruments fail. That would be one reason. Really, I don't know why you would misinterpret it. Just reading it incorrectly, I would think.
Well, reading it incorrectly is certainly one thing. Others might be that you really don't understand what the instrument is telling you. And you might not, for example, the attitude indicator doesn't really tell you whether you're climbing or descending.
No, I see. In other words, you simply misunderstand the purpose of the instrument information it gives you. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and also vertical speed with the lag and telling you how fast you're going up and down and so on. So these are, or turn coordinator, telling you bank information.
Yeah, thinking it's giving you bank information.
Certainly, so those are. And then about controlling the aircraft, what would be some of the problems you could run into in aircraft control?
How about inappropriate control response?
Well, over-controlling, you mean?
Well, you could over-control, you could not properly trim the aircraft, and actually take the wrong action. If get confused and when your speed is building pitch down, you just get confused how the controls work under the stress.
Okay, yeah, okay, that sounds good to me.
Now, hold on just a second. JC, as an examiner, I have the idea that I didn't really give you what you were looking for there.
Well, there's kind of two parts to what we're going to be talking about here, because I think you really know what it is that we're trying to do, and I'm kind of fishing around a little bit to see if you've got the knowledge. And I think in the end, we finally have gotten it all out as to the kinds of things that need to be discussed here.
But what are you looking for the applicant to do in this particular case? You're really just trying to find out their extent of knowledge or whether they've done this before. What are we looking for here?
Well, I am looking for all of that. I'm looking to see that the applicant has a handle on how the instrument systems and the airplane and how he controls the airplane, those all have to relate to one another, and I want to make sure that he has a reasonable handle on all of that. Now, we're not trying to create an instrument pilot at this time. That comes in another 100 hours or so, or 150 hours. But the idea is that they have to have a basic understanding for a number of reasons. I mean, there's the obvious safety reason. The practical test standard requires that they do. And so it's important that people understand how to control the aircraft on the basis of their instruments.
Did I give you the kind of answer that you would expect from a private pilot applicant?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, okay. All right, that pretty much worries me a little bit. But anyway, let's go ahead.
Okay, what are primary and supporting instruments? I'm looking kind of for a definition here that we're...
Okay, actually, you're asking me to parrot back an FAA answer, aren't you?
Right.
Okay. Well, in that case, I'll try and do that, JC. A primary instrument is one that most directly tells you the information that you need for what you're trying to accomplish. If you're trying to hold altitude and you're flying straight and level, maybe the altimeter would be the primary instrument to do that. It most directly tells you what you need to know. If you're trying to hold a heading and you're in straight and level flight, once again, maybe the heading indicator would be the primary instrument, most directly tells you what you want to know. On the other hand, supporting instruments are instruments that lend you information but don't most directly give you the information. If you're trying to hold altitude and you're in straight and level flight, the attitude indicator would give you some information indirectly, not as directly as the altimeter. And the same way with heading. You're in straight and level flight, the attitude indicator would tell you whether or not you're in a bank, and that's going to affect your heading. It's not going to tell you what your heading is. It would support you on maintaining a constant heading.
Okay, it's an interesting point, though, that the attitude indicator is not a primary instrument for making, for any steady state maneuver, if you will.
Yes, okay, I'll buy that.
Okay.
It's a supporting instrument.
Right, okay. How do we maintain straight and level flight?
Okay, with difficulty, JC. The key to it is, once again, scan, interpretation, and control. We're trying to maintain straight and level flight. Let's maintain straight first. I believe that what I would do is on my scan is look at the heading indicator, because that most directly tells me my heading. Glance down at the attitude indicator, make sure all is well. Glance over to the altimeter and make sure that I'm on my altitude. If I need to make a correction, I would make a small correction by going back to the attitude indicator and pitching just ever so much as necessary to make that correction. Then look at the vertical speed indicator to see if I'm getting the result that I want. Go back to the heading indicator, check my heading, see if it's okay. I'd go back to the attitude indicator quickly to see that I have my correction in and staying there. Go back to the altimeter, see what kind of results I'm getting. Keep a scan going of that sort. If I were a little bit off on my heading, for instance, I would go first to the heading indicator, observe that I'm off on my heading, go to the attitude indicator and establish a little bank for correction. Maybe look at the turn indicator to verify that I'm getting the turn that I want. Go back to the altimeter, make sure my altitude is okay. Go back to the attitude indicator to make sure that I've still got my correction. Then go back to the heading indicator to see if I have the heading coming in that I want. And I would always use during the time of those corrections the attitude indicator to establish the pitch or the roll that I want to do it.
Okay.
And I think it becomes primary. The attitude indicator becomes primary during the time of those corrections.
During the time of the change, yes. I agree with that. Then how would we go to make a transition to a climb? As we'll just talk about a straight ahead climb. And then how do how do we make the transition and how do we maintain it?
Okay. Well, let's assume you're in cruise, flight, straight and level. You want to make a straight ahead climb. You should have some idea in your mind what pitch attitude is going to be required to climb at the rate that you want to climb, so you'd pitch to that attitude. And then in your scan, you would include the airspeed indicator, and as the airspeed indicator comes down and approaches the speed that you'll be climbing at, you add power and to that for the climb power, and then you'll have yourself on the attitude at the proper speed very smoothly. There are a lot of people like to add power and pitch at the same time, but if we're talking emergency level of skills for a private pilot who might get himself into the clouds, it's probably a little easier to do what I just described.
Yeah, make it a step-by-step.
Yeah. Of course, you always want to have the aircraft coordinated, and as you add power and pitch up and the airplane slows down, you're going to have to bring in right rudder.
Are we going to have to change the trim?
Well, we don't have to change the trim, but it would, if you're going to establish that and maintain that climb attitude for a while, anytime you change your speed, of course, you want to trim the aircraft.
Okay. And then how do we accomplish the level off?
It would be a reverse procedure. Basically, you're going to pitch down to a level flight attitude, maybe even slightly above level flight attitude because you haven't got your speed. I'd leave my power in until I got a cruise speed, and as I approach cruise speed, ease off on the power. Of course, having to come off the right rudder as necessary and trim as necessary for the new speed.
Okay. And then how about a descent? Is there anything different about a descent or how do we go ahead and perform a descent?
Well, on the descent, if you leave your power in, you're in cruise flight and descend, you would pick up a lot of speed. So what I would do is reduce the power till I got my descent speed that I was looking for, whatever it might be, and then pitch down to the descent attitude that I want. Once again, trim and left rudder. Okay. Or less right rudder if I'm holding right rudder.
All right. And then again, the level off on a descent, how do we do that?
Well, the level off in the descent, again, I'm not sure what speed I have chosen, but I would pitch up to the proper attitude and add power as I get the speed that I want to cruise. I don't know whether I'm going higher than cruise speed or not, but if I'm going higher than cruise speed, pitch up, and as I get to cruise speed, add power. Once again, attention to rudder and trimming. Okay,
good, good. And the last thing here in this particular part anyway is how do we accomplish a turn in level flight?
In level altitude flight?
Yes.
Okay. Well, on instruments.
That's correct.
Okay. Well, of course, you're doing all of the same things that you would be doing if you weren't on instruments in terms of the controls, but what you want to do is during the time you're turning the aircraft, you want to roll into the bank using the attitude indicator during the time that you're rolling into the bank to establish the bank angle you want. And as the airplane starts to turn, of course, add power, all of the things you would do with the controls normally. And you want to look at the turn indicator to see if you're establishing the rate of turn that you want to. If you're trying to maintain a standard rate turn, the turn indicator now becomes primary during that. And include in your scan your altimeter, because now you might be losing altitude if you haven't maintained proper back pressure. Include in your scan your heading indicator so that you see that you're coming on your proper heading. As you're coming to the heading that you want, you lead the rollout just a little bit and roll the airplane level and maybe ease off on the power, ease off on the back pressure that you had. And including your scan, your heading indicator more frequently now because you're now trying, and by the way, while you're rolling out of the turn, the attitude indicator becomes primary during that time.
Okay, good, good. The next thing I'd like to talk about, which is a little bit different, but I think it's a very important emergency skill that people need to know who aren't instrument rated, and even instrument rated pilots for that matter. But it's recovery from unusual flight attitudes on instruments. And so first of all, when we talk about an unusual attitude, we're really not talking about either the instructor or the examiner and what he thinks about what you're doing today. We're talking about what the airplane is doing.
You know, it's not my attitude towards the examiner. Okay.
And so what we're really talking about is, well, first of all, we need to define what is an unusual attitude.
Well, often just my normal flying people describe as an unusual attitude, but it's something you didn't intend. You're flying along, and you really recognize you're in an unusual attitude because you look at the panel, and normally you'll say, "What's going on here?" And that right off, as soon as you say, "What's going on here?" you're probably in an unusual attitude. But it's an extreme attitude, normally involving bank and pitch up or pitch down. Is that, I'm sorry, was that a two-part question?
No.
Okay.
You've answered
did I
the
answer it?
question.
Okay, good.
And then the next part of the question, though, is how does the pilot recognize an unusual flight attitude?
Well, again, if you look at the panel and say, "What's going on here?" and there's some attitude that you did not intend. I think any attitude that you really didn't intend is an unusual attitude. And some of them are more extreme than others. So you recognize it by looking at the panel and saying, "I didn't intend this."
So if we are in a nose-high attitude, where would we look and what would we do?
Okay, all right. I understand the question.
Okay.
Okay. And by the way, as an applicant, if you don't understand the question, I think that you have to keep pressing the examiner until you do understand the question. I truly didn't understand what was going on there. Well, the first thing you want to do is look at trends. Do you see things as is your airspeed indication high or low and trending one way or the other? Is your altitude or your vertical speed indicator going one way or the other? And so let's assume that you see that the airspeed indicator is low and decreasing. You might look at your attitude indicator. If you're in an extreme attitude, your attitude indicator may lie to you because it may have tumbled, but if it shows a big pitch-up attitude, that could confirm you're in a nose-high attitude. If your vertical speed indicator shows you climbing, and if you altimeter is going up, I think you would assume with all of this information coming in, it's a case of interpretation, scan and interpretation, I think you'd assume that you're in a nose-high attitude that you didn't intend. And if you're in a bank and the airplane's turning, you might see a turn coordinator or a turn and bank indicator indicating a turn, the heading indicator changing, and it might also tell you you're in a bank. Well, anytime you're in a nose-high attitude, the recovery procedure is simply add power and lower the nose and then level the wings. If you're in a nose-low attitude, you can't just pull up because you're going to be picking up speed. So it would be power off, level the wings first, and then pull up. Because if your wings are in a bank in a nose-low attitude and you just pull back on a wheel, you just could be tightening up that turn and adding more G-forces.
Okay, how would we recognize a nose-low attitude?
Well, you'd recognize nose-low attitude pretty much the opposite of a nose-high attitude. I believe your airspeed would be maybe high and increasing. Certainly increasing airspeed would be an indication of a nose-low attitude. Then you can maybe glance at the attitude indicator. It might show you pitch down. The vertical speed indicator would show you descending. The altimeter would be unwinding. All of those things would indicate that you're in a nose-low attitude descending.
Okay, that's a good answer. And just one last thing here. Suppose you were flying along and due to inattention or lack of skill or whatever, that you've gotten yourself into some clouds. What could you do to get the airplane on the ground safely?
Well, if I'm not an instrument-rated pilot, I'm truly having a bad day. There's some kind of lack here, JC. Well, the first thing to do is anytime you're in any kind of emergency situation, control the aircraft, maintain control of the aircraft, and really pay attention to the instruments. Get on the instrument scan. Get on instruments and act like I'm really going to fly instruments because I am. That may not intended to be, but I am flying instruments. Secondly, if I've held a consistent heading here and flown into a cloud, it seems to me to make good sense to consider the possibility of a very careful, very controlled 180-degree turn and try and fly out of that cloud because obviously I did something that got me into the clouds. So whatever I did that got me into the clouds, maybe I would want to consider undoing that. It's kind of like you pull on a little red knob, the engine quits, you put it back in again. Maybe the same thought here. If you did some action that got you into the clouds, control the aircraft first, fly the aircraft, that's paramount. But maybe undo that action, get yourself out of the clouds. Now, let's assume that you've done all of this and you're still seeing nothing but white outside the window. Now you're in a situation where you need to take some action. The biggest concern I would have, if I'm particularly flying in lumpy terrain, mountainous terrain, the biggest concern I would have is, am I at any kind of risk of running into a mountain or a hill? And so I would start using my radio aids of navigation. I'd get my VOR going if I had DME, get that, and determine my position. If I figure out where I am, because I certainly don't want to run into any terrain. It can run my day permanently. So That's the second thing I would do then, after I've considered a 180 and controlled the aircraft and so on. Make sure I avoid the terrain. And then get help on the radio. Call somebody up on the radio, and if you can't remember a frequency, 121.5 works. The only problem with 121.5 is you tend to have everybody in the world answer you at once. It becomes a Tower of Babel, so sometimes you have to control that and pick out the person you want to talk to and ask everybody else to remain silent. And you may have to control that, really. Then they have all sorts of resources. They can use radar to get you an airport, surveillance approach, or even a precision radar approach, maybe DF steer. There's lots of things they can do to help you out. And so you're well on your way in that situation. So it's not the end of the world. The biggest thing is keep control of the aircraft and really jump on flying on those instruments.
Okay. Well, John, I think I'm just about ready to go fly the airplane here, but before we go, we need to talk over just a couple of things before we get out there. And the first thing is I want to make very clear at this point that you're the pilot in command.
Okay.
And even though you're a student pilot right now, the FARs are real clear that you're going to be pilot in command of this flight. So I just want to make sure that you take all of the actions that you need to take based on that. I'll also tell you, kind of in the same breath, that I'm not going to go out of my way to try and trip you up or ask you to do something illegal or outside the safe operating envelope of the airplane. And so if it sounds to you like I've asked you to do something that is illegal, immoral, or fattening, or whatever, however you want to put that, then I would expect you to ask me about it. Because I'm not, I can misspeak, and I may use words differently than your instructor did. And
so if I think you've asked me to do something illegal, don't do it and ask you about it.
That's right, because I'm not going to go out of my way to do that.
Okay. You might do it accidentally, but you're not going to do it deliberately.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, for example, I may misread the chart and say, go over here, and there's a restricted area over there, and I'm really not trying to get you to do that. The second thing is that if we need to transfer control of the airplane for any reason today, and there may be one time while we're doing the instrument flying that when we do the unusual attitudes, for example, then I want to make sure that we each understand who's flying the airplane at all times. And I want to make it a positive control change. I have control. Will you take control? Or I have, you know, this sort of thing. I don't want to make a big deal out of it. I just want to make sure we know who's doing it. I'm not going to ask you to do anything that's not in the PTS.
Okay.
All right? Even if I did, I couldn't evaluate you on it because there's no standard.
By PTS, you're referring to the practical test standards, that FA booklet we looked at earlier that was applied with the King course.
That's right.
Okay.
And, but I'm not going to ask you to do anything that's not in there. We are indeed going to do everything that is in there. It may not look like it to you, but because I combine maneuvers many times.
Okay.
And my plan of action, for that matter, sends us along a route that I think is fairly efficient and so that we don't waste a lot of time in the air.
Okay.
But we will perform all tasks. I may ask you some more questions while we're out there, because there's really no formal oral or formal flight like there used to be.
Okay.
But, so we may be talking some more while we're in the air.
And hard to imagine there's questions you haven't asked yet, J.C.
Well, I'll think of some. Yeah. And the last thing I'd like to say here is that if we have an actual in-flight emergency, something that we didn't create, maybe we did create it, but I mean, on the other hand, it's an actual emergency. Didn't intend to create it.
Right.
As long as you appear to be in control of the airplane, you're going to be in control. And the only thing I would probably say to you is that at this point, the check ride is going to stop. That doesn't mean that you failed anything. If you haven't failed it up to that point, it's not a failure. We just have a more pressing situation to deal with.
Okay, we have something a little more urgent.
That's right. That's right. And so the check ride is going to stop.
Okay.
And I will become your co-pilot at that point.
Okay.
But at no time am I going to be pilot in command.
Okay.
I may make a suggestion to you that if you say, for example, if the engine has failed and you say we're going to go over here and land in this rocky field, and I say, well, why don't we try that airport that's right below us that you didn't see on your side of the plane? That would probably be but that'll be the extent of my help, unless you tell me otherwise.
Now you keep kind of re-emphasizing it. No time am I going to be pilot in command. And I'm not sure, as a applicant here, I understand what you're telling me. I think you're telling me something I'm not picking up on.
Okay.
Is that you're not going to be responsible for insurance purposes, not going to be responsible for FAA purposes? What is it you're really telling me?
All of the above.
Uh-huh.
And what I'm telling
you is... In other
words,
if anything goes wrong,
it's your fault.
It's on my neck.
That's right, it's your fault.
Okay, okay.
And so that's why I say, if I've asked you to do something that you don't think is safe or is right or something else, then I would expect you to say something to me.
So when you emphasize as the examiner that I'm going to be the pilot in command, you're really saying I'm responsible for the aircraft and preserving the aircraft. I'm responsible for the legal ramifications of this and so on.
That's
Is
correct.
that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
And I think that's
and I'm doing that for you folks. I want
Yeah.
to get that.
yeah, that's a very important point, and there's a lot of reasons for that that we don't want to go into here, but there's a lot of reasons for it, and the examiner is not piloting command, and the FAR is pretty specific about that.
So that's all examiners are going to take this exact position.
That's right.
It's on your neck, buddy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And so don't let me do anything to you. I'm not going to try to, but I mean, if it sounds like I have.
So I can't abdicate. Don't give up control of the de facto control of the aircraft to you. I'm in charge of this, and you ask me to do something I don't want to do. I shouldn't do it.
That's correct.
Okay.
We ought to probably talk about it, but on the
Yeah,
other hand.
maybe a good way to flunk a check ride, but yeah, okay, I understand.
All right. And really, that's just about it. I think we've got a beautiful day to go flying, and I'm looking forward to getting to patients.
Well, I'm glad you're done asking me questions in the oral, JC. I feel this was pretty thorough and a lot of work.
Okay.
All right. Ready to go fly?
You bet.
Let's go fly.